for the
Thank you.
questions. Round of applause. Now we are switching gears, and Tim is going to introduce our next speaker.
So next up, very pleased to introduce Dr. Aaron Koenig, who is the Vice President of Early Clinical Development at Sage Therapeutics. And he's about to introduce us to their program of studies in HD.
Good morning. Wonderful. All right, well, thank you so much for the introduction. I am Aaron Koenig. I'm VP at Sage Therapeutics. We are a small biotech company located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the United States, focused exclusively on disorders of brain health. And today we'll be talking about the Perspective program, which is a clinical trial program designed to evaluate the effects of a novel compound, SAGE-718, on cognitive functioning in patients with Huntington's disease. So in terms of disclosures, I am an employee of Sage, and the Perspective program is sponsored by Sage. So just very briefly, to talk about cognitive impairment in Huntington's, we are all aware that Huntington's is a systemic disease, that it prominently impacts motor functioning, and as you've heard at a number of different talks over the course of the last few days, it also carries with it a very significant psychiatric as well as cognitive burden. And cognitive symptoms such as difficulty planning and making decisions can appear very early in Huntington's disease, often preceding the emergence of motor symptoms. And these cognitive symptoms, while perhaps very mild at first, very quickly can become debilitating for patients and the entire family unit, resulting in cascading impacts on patients' life and everyday functioning. Some of the consequences of losing cognitive abilities include losing the ability to work, to contribute to demands at home, to drive an automobile, and ultimately maintain independence. And since there are no approved or effective treatments to target cognitive impairment in Huntington's, this is represents a critical area of unmet need. So I'm actually very glad that we were talking about 24S-hydroxycholesterol a moment ago. Usually I'm the one having to introduce the concept. But SAGE-718 is a positive allosteric modulator of the NMDA receptor, much like 24S-hydroxycholesterol. And SAGE-718 works by modulation at a novel neurosteroid binding site. So I'll just orient you to the NMDA receptor here on the right of the screen. So glycine and glutamate are the primary ligands for the receptor, but SAGE-718 binds at a novel binding site that also binds 24S-HC. We know that 24-hydroxycholesterol is decreased early in Huntington's disease, and through actually work that we and others have done, we've demonstrated a correlation between a drop in 24S-hydroxycholesterol levels and cognitive impairment early in Huntington's disease. And we actually did this using data from the TRACK-HD study where we measured 24S-hydroxycholesterol in early Huntington's patients and actually looked at their cognitive scores over time. And what we found at year 1, year 2, and year 3 of follow-up, an actual decrease in performance on tests like the symbol digit modality test on the trails. And this initial insight led us to test the application of SAGE-718 in an early Huntington's population where we were actually able to demonstrate a pro-cognitive effect. And we have now pursued the understanding of SAGE-718 in a number of different neurodegenerative diseases, including Huntington's, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. We've completed target engagement studies using a pharmacologic challenge, namely ketamine, which is an antagonist of the NMDA receptor, and showing that SAGE-718 reverses the effects of ketamine. We've completed safety testing in phase 1 with healthy volunteers and some small phase 2 studies. But what I'm really here to talk about today is our comprehensive trial program looking at the effects of SAGE-718 in Huntington's cognitive impairment, and this is what we are calling the Perspective program. So Perspective is made of 3 clinical trials, the Dimension study, which is a well-powered placebo-controlled study, which I'll get into more detail in a moment, the Surveyor study, which is a companion study, much smaller in scope, and both of these studies will roll into an open-label safety study, and both Dimension and Surveyor are actually now enrolling in the United States. And I think one of the main points to take away is that when we're going into new therapeutic areas, but also aspects of diseases where there's not been regulatory precedent, we have to think very deliberately about what we're measuring and how we're assembling a data package. And I hope you get the sense from the 3 trials I'm talking about today that those pieces will come together to really paint a picture of what the effects of drug on cognitive functioning in Huntington's may look like. So the first study is the Dimension study, as I mentioned. This is a phase 2 placebo-controlled study. Patients will be randomized either to drug or placebo for a period of 3 months. We're enrolling about 180 participants. In terms of our inclusion criteria, they obviously need to have Huntington's disease, have cognitive impairment as defined by a MoCA of less than 26. We are aware that there are many patients with early Huntington's who will have cognitive impairment and not meet this threshold, but we're sort of boxed in by this criteria. And then have a TFC of less than 13. And the idea is that we randomize patients 1-to-1 over a course of 3 months. We do serial cognitive testing using the HD-CAB, which is a composite cognitive battery developed for Huntington's disease, and then follow up these patients for a period of time off drug. And we're going to be measuring a number of other endpoints in the trial as well, including elements of the UHDRS, as well as measures of functioning quality of life, as well as a novel measure called the high-def scale, which we at Sage have developed, and I'll talk more about in a moment. Now, the Surveyor study is a second placebo-controlled study that is happening in parallel to the previous trial. And this is a really unique study. It's much smaller in scope. It's only going to include 40 participants, and it only lasts for a month. Now, in this study, patients will again be randomized 1-to-1 to drug or placebo, and we will be doing the same measures of cognitive performance. But we're also going to be doing some unique measures of functioning that we hope to correlate with changes in cognitive performance. Some of those measures will include a virtual reality assessment tool called the VRFCAT, which was actually developed for another disease process, but we've applied to Huntington's, and it asks patients to navigate some day-to-day tasks like going to the store and assembling a shopping list. And then we're also going to be asking participants to participate in a driving simulator. And the idea for this study is if we are able to see some cognitive improvement over the course of a month, which would be consistent with trials we've already completed to date, how do those improvements in cognitive performance translate to measures of functioning that may have some meaning to patients' lives? And it really helps to answer this question, so what does this mean? So what does it mean to improve cognitive impairment in patients with Huntington's for patients' everyday lives? And I would say the last interesting element to this study is that we're going to be including a non-interventional cohort of healthy volunteers who will not be getting drug, but they will be doing the same assessments. And this will be able to give us a sense of how these performance improvements compare to what a healthy individual should be able to do. Again, trying to answer that question of how much are we improving cognition, and will be it enough for patients? We have a number of other measures that we're including in the study, including quality of life measures, as well as this other scale that we'll talk about in a moment called the high-def, which is a novel patient-reported outcome measure. And then participants from both of these studies will have the opportunity to roll into an open-label safety study. So you'll notice that those first 2 studies I mentioned are on the shorter end. They are meant to demonstrate an acute symptomatic benefit. But we hope, though, to follow patients for at least a year, but more likely we're going to be continuing this study for a number of years, looking at long-term safety and tolerability, but also potentially long-term efficacy. And we're going to hope to accomplish that by using some naturalistic data from, for example, Enroll, to compare where patients normally would end up on a cognitive trajectory, on a functional trajectory, and whether or not they look different when they're participating in this trial. And so, as I mentioned, patients from both of the 2 RCTs will have a chance to participate in the open label study. But we're also going to be including a group of de novo participants. And so these will be participants who are just a bit unimpaired, or a little bit less impaired than the other participants, who just did not meet the criteria to include in those other studies, and they'll have either normal cognitive function or a TFC of 13. But we are curious to understand what the long-term effects of treating them with the pro-cognitive agent may also look like. And what we are hoping to do is then analyze the cohort in its entirety to understand some of the long-term effects of treating with SAGE-718. And you'll see a number of the exploratory endpoints listed on the bottom, including CGI, this high-def scale, the HD Pro Triad, as well as others. So just a moment on the endpoints. So the HD-CAB is not too unfamiliar within the field now. It is a composite cognitive battery composed of 6 cognitive tests that was compiled by Julie Stout and colleagues. We are working closely with Julie Stout to make sure we're deploying the HD-CAB properly in the study. And you'll notice that the HD-CAB includes 3 measures of executive functioning. And this is very important to us because the early trials that we've conducted to date have all demonstrated an improvement in executive functioning. And this is really both one of the defining features of cognitive impairment in Huntington's, but it's also very closely tied to patient functioning in their everyday lives. And so we hope that seeing signals on one or all of these subtests will be indicative of a positive treatment response. And then I've also alluded to this new scale that we developed called the high-def scale. This came out of a review of the literature and also speaking with individuals in the field, that there really seemed to be a gap in understanding the effects of early cognitive changes on subtle but important aspects of functioning early in the course of Huntington's disease. And so we're not talking about a loss of ability to perform ADLs or even IADLs, but what we were really curious is maybe you can still work, but can you do your job less well? Are there problems, are there compensatory mechanisms that you have to impart to stay working, or things at home where people are starting to pick up the slack, so to speak, or in driving or in communication? And actually, over the last 2 years, we developed the scale through a series of qualitative interviews, have validated the scale, and are applying it here as an exploratory measure. We're also very interested in partnering with the community to better understand this measure. And if you have an upcoming study and are interested in using this, please contact a member of our team. We're happy to share and disseminate within the community. So in conclusion, this has been very much focused on methodology. I want to sort of bring you back to that big point that developing a robust data package that will be convincing to regulators is a very tall order when you're talking about a new area of an indication where there aren't any approved therapies. And so rather than take cues from other neurodegenerative disorders where the time course is different, the character of the cognitive deficits is different, we really needed to design something from scratch here. And that's really the compendium of the 3 trials that you're seeing here today. And so 2 of those trials are already enrolling in the US. We have sites opening soon in the UK, Australia, and Canada, and are looking forward to having conversations with folks around the country, around the world really, to understand the scope of this program. And thank you very much.
Great. Thanks a lot, Aaron. Questions for Aaron? Yes, over there. Jaime? Over there, blue shirt, here. Okay.
I am asking, it's a nice work. I am asking, which is the rationality of only 1 month of double-blind?
Only one, I'm sorry, it was only one.
Could you repeat? It was difficult to hear acoustically, Jaime.
Only 1 month of double-blind to assess cognition.
Okay. 1 month of...
Okay, for 1 month, I'm sorry. So
you have a lot of effect in both arms.
So the main trial is a 3-month trial. So it's going to be a 3-month period of assessment. Mm-hmm. The effects that we've seen to date with SAGE-718, we've actually seen placebo-controlled response over the course of 2 weeks. So we see a very acute onset. The 3-month time point was decided in collaboration with some external stakeholders about what a sufficient amount of data would be to demonstrate at least a convincing response and a demonstration, a separation from placebo. The 4-week study that you're referencing, that's really meant to be correlational. So do we see a correlation between the cognitive tests and the functional test? And that study itself is not powered actually for a difference between the two. But it's true, it's a short study, but we think the drug has acute onset.
All right. Another question, Christina, over there. No, microphone is running towards you, Christina.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have been discussing your protocols within the clinical trial committee at CHDI, so it's not really new what you presented. But I wanted to ask you to comment on the scale HD-DEF, because as you all are aware, we have been developing for many years the first 2.0, which, from what I gleaned from your slide, have very common domains. And so why did you felt that you needed to develop yet another scale? And how different it will be?
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question, and you know, the first has many strengths. I think that the aspects of Huntington's that we were really focused on were the cognitive components, and while the first, I think, captures maybe all of the aspects of Huntington's that are starting to impair functioning, we really needed something that asked because when you talk to patients who are starting to have early cognitive changes, you kind of really have to paint a very subtle picture of that. And that's where we felt that the first didn't quite achieve what we were hoping to. We understand, though, that a new measure comes with it a lot of challenges in terms of generalizability beyond the trials we're studying. That's why we are interested in sharing it with the community and getting a sense of what others think of it as well. But yeah, we're very familiar with the first. So.
All right. Maybe one last question here.
Is that working? Yeah, I'm Patricia Sandberg-Ducre from Roche. Thank you for your talk and walking us over your program. I'm just having a question. This dimension is a phase 2 study. I understand it's not going to be a phase 2 dose-finding study. Can you comment how you selected your dose? Did you go on receptor occupancy, or what are you targeting?
Thank you for the question. So it is a single dose, and the dose was selected based on our understanding of where we've seen a pharmacologic response in actually 3 different trials we've conducted to date. And you know, you have to be very deliberate in your modulation of the NMDA receptor, and so we think that where we are hitting is at a point where we have seen a very, very safe and well-tolerated profile to date, as well as efficacy, and that's how we've targeted the dosing.
All right.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Aaron.